A handsome red-haired young man looked in the mirror and suddenly thought, "Isn't this appearance that of that trash Kale?" It turned out he was someone from another world who, after waking up, found he had become Kale Hennetus. Before that, everything was normal. He had borrowed the book, The Birth of a Hero, to read, then fell asleep without realizing it, and now he found himself as someone else. This must be the legendary transmigration situation. Actually, he was only guessing, and was still quite vague about his current identity, not knowing if this was really Kale. But with this body and this hair, it greatly resembled what the novel described about Kale. He recalled what he had read in Chapter 1. Kale Hennetus was just a minor villain, mainly serving as a backdrop for the main character, Choi Han. Soaking in the bathtub, he thought this wasn't so bad. He had nothing to be attached to being an orphan with no money, no love for life, and no one to sacrifice himself for. He had just lived day by day peacefully. That was his life under the name Kim Rok-soo. Now that he had become Kale Hennetus, he thought he couldn't die here, because he didn't want to die, nor did he want to be in pain. Even if this life was quite bad, living here was much better than his real world. Instinctively, he touched the place where a scar should have been, but now it was unblemished. This meant that this Kale hadn't been beaten up by Choi Han yet. According to the novel, Kale Hennetus was a drunkard who loved violence. No wonder he got beaten up. Having read the novel, Kim Rok-soo, currently in Kale Hennetus's body, knew what would happen next to this useless red-haired guy. Choi Han, after overcoming some difficulties, would become the image of a true hero. Kim Rok-soo's life motto. Now, as Kale was still very simple, find every way to avoid being beaten by Choi Han. If he could avoid that incident, he would definitely continue on his path. He would be cautious to live long, avoid pain, and make his life flourish here. Luckily, he still remembered the entire beginning of the novel, so things would probably be fine. A voice from outside cut off Kale's thoughts. He stepped out to see the old butler. The old man smiled kindly and offered him a cup of tea, looking benign and gentle. But Kale knew that he was actually Ron Molan, an assassin who had crossed the sea from the eastern continent to come here. Behind that fake benevolence was a cunning old man. When Kale found this out, he also became determined about what he needed to do later. He needed to push that old man onto the main character. Kale knew Ron wasn't the only dangerous person around him. There were too many strong people in this world. So first he needed strength to protect himself. On a continent where war would sooner or later break out everywhere to avoid pain and live long, he needed to be strong to a certain extent. Of course, not too strong, because being too strong would inevitably lead to painful situations. At this moment, a servant came in intending to help him change. Being someone not fussy, he decided to choose a simple outfit. Truly, a handsome person looks good in anything. This was indeed the face to complete what is called fashion. He looked in the mirror, adjusted his lapel, then turned to look at Ron. The old man still wore that fake benign smile. Then he went out with Ron. Kale followed behind Ron. Servants or maids who encountered Kale would shrink back, greet him respectfully, and then quickly disappear. This was quite strange to him because, after all, Kale had never hit anyone. He was just a bit excessive with drinking and carousing. Occasionally, when too drunk, he would break things. But in essence, the Kale of the past was indeed trash. Kale entered the dining room and immediately saw his family. His father, Count Daruth Hennetuse, current head of the Hennetus family. Then Kale's stepmother, Countess Violin Hennetus, and her son and daughter, Basin Hennetus and Lily Hennetus. All four of them were looking at Kale. He sat down at the dining table with his family. Briefly speaking of the situation, his father had only one superpower, being super rich. Otherwise, he had no other special abilities. Besides, his stepmother and younger siblings always avoided him, so it was the perfect environment for him to live quietly alone, except for their stares at this moment. The atmosphere became quite awkward, so Kale decided to eat quickly and leave. But he couldn't help but smile because the food spread before him was incredibly delicious. That radiant smile made his younger brother Basin, who glanced over, jump in surprise. His strange expression puzzled Kale, but he ignored it and just took a sip of wine. Count Daruth thought his son would complain as usual, but unexpectedly he praised the wine and other things, making the Count's eyes widen and jaw drop. Kale thought being a spare was also good. His family didn't criticize his lack of manners. The important thing was not to provoke Basin, as he would be the heir. He figured he'd rather use his position to wander around peaceful places than have to rule a chaotic territory, potentially logging out of Earth's server at any moment. And if that wasn't feasible, he would gather all his wealth and go to a place untouched by war. While thinking about such grand matters, the Count suddenly asked if he needed anything. "Good question, old man," Kale thought. Our handsome, red-haired young man pretended to ponder, but in reality, the answer was only one: he needed money as much as possible. And naturally, the Count, with his innate superpower of being super rich, agreed immediately. Kale smiled joyfully, and then he went into a state of shock when he saw the amount of money he received. This family truly had nothing but money. He would have to change his initial plans. According to Ron, today was May 29th, year 781 of the Felix calendar. If so, he had to hurry even more, because the main character of this novel, Choi Han, would soon arrive in the Hennetus territory. Kale's carriage rolled down the road and then stopped in front of a tea shop called The Fragrance of Tea with Poetry. He stepped down from the carriage, glanced around, and noticed the driver still standing behind him, his fearful face looking somewhat pitiful. The original Kale's rotten personality must have intimidated him often. So Kale ordered him to leave first and then entered the shop alone. Inside, everyone's face showed clear fear upon seeing Kale, except for the fat shop owner over there, who looked like a walking piggy bank, a rich bastard. Facing him, Kale, not one to beat around the bush, directly stated his purpose. He would rent the third floor of the tea shop for the entire day, along with a non-bitter tea and a good book to read. After ordering, Kale paid Billows. The owner's face froze. 1 million gallons was an exorbitant amount, but who was Kale? From a prominent family with a wealthy father, that sum was nothing to him. Therefore, Kale considered the excess amount a tip for him. If he wasn't going to abuse money and power now, when would he? Kale looked up at the city gate through the window. Just this morning, Choi Han had been driven away after reporting the attack to the Count. Instead of seeking information about those who had murdered his cherished people, Choi Han had prioritized giving the deceased a proper burial. He was truly a kind person. Kale Kim Rok-soo recalled the words the original Kale from the novel had spoken. Why should rulers like him care about the lives of those useless commoners out there? The wine in his hand is more valuable than the lives of useless commoners like Choi Han. And after saying that in front of the main character, the inevitable happened. He was beaten up. According to the novel, that's what was supposed to happen. Our Kale shuddered just thinking about it. Too difficult, let's skip it. Kale tried to stop thinking about the novel's contents, but then he saw Choi Han being stopped by the guards at the gate. They were undoubtedly asking for identification, but someone like Choi Han would never possess such a thing. So his being turned away was a matter of course. But Kale knew that for now Choi Han would just obediently walk away, only to wait until nightfall to jump over the wall and silently infiltrate the city. And then he would pass by a Kale who was busy drinking. We all know what happens after that. Kale decided to leave the shop. Before going, he didn't forget to tell Billows, the owner, to hold his spot. After Kale left, the people in the shop couldn't help but whisper in surprise. It was the first time in their lives they had seen the drunkard Kale leave the establishment without breaking a single thing. Naturally, Kale heard all of it. Suddenly, he thought that he also needed to learn some self-defense skills, just in case he encountered strong individuals. To survive here, he shouldn't become overly strong, just strong enough to live a comfortable, leisurely life. If he became too powerful, he might encounter dangerous situations. What he needed was an ancient power. Among those powers, he needed an invisible shield similar to a mage's energy shield. Today he would prepare the bait for this indestructible shield. Kale approached a bread stall. The stall owner's horrified face no longer surprised him. He wanted to buy all the bread there and handed the man a gold coin. After a moment of stunned silence, the bread stall owner understood what Kale said. Of course he agreed to sell, then rushed to pack the goods with the speed of Flash. Carrying a sack of bread on his shoulder enough to feed an entire clan, Kale looked at the surrounding scenery. Even though he already knew this place was indeed vastly different from Korea, it was truly a fantasy world. In the eyes of the people around him, he was a weakling. Their gazes made him feel hurt. Shrugging it off, Kale decided to leave as quickly as possible. Thus, he didn't notice two children tailing him. After a long walk, Kale stopped at a desolate hill, heavily placing the sack on the ground. In front of him was an old wooden door. Kale opened it. Behind it was a dilapidated, ruined scene. Notably, among the ruins was what he was looking for, this ancient tree. He estimated it to be at least 100 years old. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind him. "Don't go near that tree. It's a man-eating tree." The man-eating tree, it was rumored that people who had committed suicide on this tree all turned into mummies overnight. Hearing this one might expect Kale to be frightened, but on the contrary, he smiled. Because if so, then this was definitely the tree he was looking for. A long time ago, in ancient times, there was a woman who loved eating so much that her gluttony caused her to be expelled from the temple, and she passed away not long after. From her corpse, a tree had grown. Her grudge and her power were all within this tree. That was the power of the indestructible shield. Holding a loaf of bread, Kale was fumbling around looking for the hole to feed the tree. Meanwhile, the two strange kids kept nagging in his ear, advising him not to do it, that he would die, and so on. Kale sighed in exasperation. He didn't understand why he always encountered such troublesome kids wherever he went. Should he chase them away before starting the ritual? The troublesome duo continued their chanting, forcing Kale to use the tactic of bribing them with food, hoping to send them elsewhere. But the children, worried that he would be eaten by the tree, still didn't forget to warn him. At this point, Kale used his ultimate move, bringing up his reputation as Trash Kale, to scare them. Unexpectedly, it worked. The red-haired boy Hong immediately got scared and told his older sister, On, to run. The girl On lingered for a moment to remind Kale to be careful, then ran after her brother. Kale ignored them and continued his unfinished work. He stuffed a loaf of bread into the deep hole at the base of the tree, and the loaf immediately disappeared. Kale was startled. He even thought it might suck his hand in too. The shield was the remaining power of that person. Therefore, the tree that grew on that person's corpse also carried an ancient power, and that primitive savage existence was very trustworthy. Kale recalled the details from the novel he had to feed the tree until the darkness disappeared. That darkness was formed from hatred. When it vanished, the light behind it would appear, and once he saw that the indestructible shield would surely belong to him. Without hesitation, Kale poured all the remaining bread from the sack, letting it eat its fill. After devouring all the bread, Kale had brought a savage roar echoed from the hole. Kale thought he would need at least 10 more bags of food to complete the ritual. The roar still echoed in the air, making Kale a bit scared. That person's grudge must have been very deep. He decided to come back tomorrow. On his way back, he saw the annoying duo from earlier happily eating the bread he had given them. Kale couldn't help but feel a bit of compassion. They probably wouldn't dare go near the tree, but if they poked their heads in there and got eaten, it would be a bit troublesome. He was a good person at heart, but to play the role of Trash Kale perfectly, he pretended to set a condition with the children: if they still wanted to eat tomorrow, they couldn't tell anyone about what he had just done. Returning to the tea shop, the owner Billows greeted him without any further questions. Kale praised the tea and the book. Although he had only read half of it, he found it quite interesting. He liked how the main character's abilities were recognized and how he grew. Before leaving, he didn't forget to tell Billows not to let anyone else read that book, so he could read it whenever he returned. Naturally, Billows agreed and bid Kale farewell. Not long after, at a bar just like everyone else, the owner saw Kale and bowed his head in fear, praying inwardly that he hadn't done anything to anger this young master. Kale knew why they had this attitude. Previously, all the items around the original Kale would be smashed when he got drunk. Following the old habit for show, Kale tossed the bar owner a gold coin requesting the usual things. only adding an order for some boiled chicken breast without salt. The owner, surprised by Kale's mild demeanor, quickly brought out what he had ordered. Around them, gangsters and swindlers all kept their distance from Kale. He began to find the original Kale a bit odd. Usually trashy scions of wealthy families either hung out with these types or had such lackeys, but the original Kale despised these people. To him, they were scum. Kale's order was brought out. He took it and went to another place. Opening the expensive bottle of wine in his hand, Kale took a long swig, feeling a warmth spread through him. If he remembered correctly, about 100 paces from the city gate along this wall was where the main character Choi Han would jump over. Opposite that spot, there would be two cats, one large and one small, warming each other. This was a world where coincidence played a rather important role. Choi Han would change his angle to avoid startling the cats, and indeed, Kale saw Choi Han there. Choi Han glanced at him assessingly. Kale began to feel a little anxious. Fortunately, the alcohol helped calm him down. To avoid being beaten up as in the original story, Kale decided to act first to give Choi Han a good first impression. So he began to act like a professional Oscar-winning actor. First, he took out the chicken breast he had just bought from the bar and fed it to the cats. They were smaller than he thought. Kale began to tear the meat into small pieces for them. Initially, the two cats were wary, sniffing and sniffing again. Finally, without any more suspicion, they ate greedily. After taking care of the cats, Kale turned to befriend Choi Han, asking if he had a place to go or if he was hungry. As expected, Choi Han didn't answer, silently observing him. Kale asked why he wasn't answering. Finally, this time, Choi Han took the bait. He replied that he was hungry. Just waiting for that, Kale suggested Choi Han follow him and he would find something for him to eat. Winning someone over through their stomach was always effective. And so Choi Han followed Kale. The red kitten Hong, after eating its fill, clung to Kale, not leaving. It rubbed its small, cute face against his leg. Kale looked down at his feet. Although he wasn't a cat person, he had to admit it was very cute. As he looked up, he met Choi Han's gaze, which felt like 3 parts judgment, 7 parts fatherly. It was impossible to ignore. Kale sat down, petted the kitten, said a few words, and then bid it farewell. The red kitten seemed very happy and only left at the urging of the gray cat, on. Kale let out a sigh of relief, thinking he had probably passed Choi Han's character assessment. The two of them walked towards Kale's home. Although Kale tried to act as if he didn't notice, Choi Han kept staring at him, making him feel self-conscious. Choi Han was still evaluating whether Kale was an enemy who needed to be killed. A hesitant call of young Master Neem broke the awkward atmosphere between the two. It turned out to be the voices of the 2 gate guards. Kale felt helpless. He really couldn't understand why even just calling him made them so scared. They stuttered. He and Choi Han entered the estate. Ron was already standing at the door, waiting to welcome him back. Ron looked at Choi Han. Choi Han looked back at Ron. Kale had the illusion that sparks were flying between them. He told Choi Han to follow him. Ron kindly asked Kale what had happened, and if he needed him to take care of this strange guest. Kale declined and led Choi Han upstairs. A young man with blonde hair appeared. It was Vice Butler Hans who was responsible for Kale. He was quite surprised that Kale had actually come back this time, even though he had been drinking. Kale raised the wine bottle, causing Hans to scream and instinctively cower, thinking Kale was about to throw it at him. It turned out Kale just wanted him to put it away. Kale led Choi Han to the kitchen, where the person Choi Han needed to meet was Beecrock's son of the old assassin Ron. Like his father, he was also a fearsome person. Looking at the way he cooked with that face and those hands, Kale understood why Choi Han needed to meet this person, Beecrock's. When Beecrock's witnessed Choi Han's skills as Choi Han hypothetically beat Kale like a child, he would be impressed and decide to follow him. For Kale, this was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because if he could get Beecrock's to leave with Choi Han, his father Ron would also follow. Kale smiled at the plan he had devised, then ordered Beecrock's to cook something for Choi Han to eat. Beecrock's looked displeased, still firmly holding a knife, and looked at Kale affectionately, as if he were about to butcher him. But Kale resolutely gave the order. This time, Beecrock's had no objections, respectfully obeyed, and set to work. Kale silently thought this situation was wonderful. Beecrock's, Choi Han, and Ron, all 3 of them were now connected. Perhaps because he was too happy, he also started to feel hungry. So instead of cooking one portion for Choi Han, Beecrox now had to cook an additional portion for him. Remembering yesterday's steak, Kale casually praised Beecrox's talent, acknowledging him as a skilled chef. Upon hearing this, Beecrox's face looked as if he wanted to ask Kale what kind of wrong medicine he had taken today to suddenly be so glib. After ordering, Kale left the kitchen. At this moment, Vice Butler Hans followed him and asked how to handle Choi Han. Kale instructed him to treat Choi Han very well. Now that Choi Han, Ron, and Beecrox had met, his work for the day was done. If that wasn't enough, he would make Choi Han hit someone and let Beecrox see it. Kale told Hans to bring the food to his room when it was ready, then left. Hans reported everything that had just happened to Count Daruth, Kale's father, from Kale going to the illegal tea shop of the Flynn Merchant Guild to bringing a stranger home, and even the fact that this time he drank but returned sober. Hans asked for instructions on whether he needed to have someone follow Kale anymore, but Count Daruth refused. He thought that as long as Kale was within this city, everything he did was still under his authority. So Hans just needed to continue observing and reporting to him as usual about what Kale had done. Count Daruth was somewhat pensive. He realized his God-forsaken son had changed. Kale was different from usual, not because he had suddenly become stronger or smarter, but even all his actions were unusual. After thinking for a moment, the Count decided to have Hans find information about Fredo's illegitimate child. After receiving the order, Hans went out. In the room, the Count thought that it wasn't just Kale who had changed. Even the atmosphere on the continent had become more dangerous. The Hennetus family had protected their assets and increased them little by little. Their motto was not to be recorded in history, just to hope for a peaceful and happy life. Perhaps it was time for him to reinforce the city walls, while the Count was busy worrying about matters of national importance. Kale was struggling to deal with the wicked old man Ron. Kale's face had now turned pale green. He was not feeling well at all. To make matters worse, Ron brought him a cup of lemon tea, which only worsened his pain. Ron feigned concern, saying that because Kale was sleeping so soundly, he didn't dare to wake him. Kale was speechless. This old man not going into acting was truly a waste of talent. Suddenly, he saw a wound on Ron's neck. Ron vaguely replied that it was a cat scratch, but in reality it was because the old man had tried to teach the main character a lesson and unexpectedly got counterattacked. Kale knew but didn't expose his lie. He downed the cup of tea Ron brought in one gulp, stood up and went out, telling Ron not to worry about him because someone else would take care of things outside. Just as he pushed the door open to go out, the main character's face appeared right in front of his eyes, startling him. He instinctively slammed the door shut. What a close call. So he turned to blame Ron. The old man feigned surprise, not expecting Kale to be so startled, then explained that before he could say anything, Kale had already gone out and opened the door. Ron had told Hans to have Choi Han wait in the room, but Choi Han insisted on seeing Kale and waited outside. After calming himself, Kale opened the door, wanting to know Choi Han's purpose for coming. Choi Han replied that he wanted to repay Kale's kindness. Kale thought this was truly absurd, so he refused and asked if Choi Han needed anything else from him. Hitting the nail on the head, Choi Han began to confide. Kale knew for sure it was related to Harris Village. It was best for him not to get involved in this matter. Kale decided to push all the work onto Hans, not forgetting to praise him as a talented vice butler who could surely help Choi Han. At the same time, Kale also ordered Ron to help Choi Han with all his might. Kale left Choi Han with Ron as he was busy getting more money because he would need a lot of it today. At this moment, Ron felt things were starting to get interesting. The brave puppy, Kale didn't like sour things at all, and always hated them, yet he still drank the entire cup of tea Ron had prepared. Ron turned to assess Choi Han. Choi Han reeked of blood, but presented himself as clean, a typical despicable and deceitful person in Ron's eyes. Ron led the way for Choi Han. Choi Han glanced briefly at Kale's retreating back, then turned his head to follow Ron. As planned yesterday, Kale went to the cursed tree again with a sack full of bread on his shoulder. He continued to pour all the bread into the hole at the base of the tree. This time a woman's voice echoed from within. "Give me more." This was the voice of the woman mentioned in the book, the nun who had starved to death. He suddenly remembered his father's instructions. He didn't know what it was about, but his father had told him to visit the study tonight. Therefore, he had to return before dinner, while his goal for today was to satisfy at least half of the tree's gluttony. Time was running out. He had to hurry even more. He descended from the top of the hill to get more bread. He saw the two kids On and Hong from the other day. There were some wounds on their grubby faces. Kale frowned, clicked his tongue, and walked past them. Kale went into the area of the market with many bread shops. He had already taken bread from yesterday's shop, so to avoid waiting for them to prepare, he had to find another one. Right then, an older woman, an Ajuma, proactively struck up a conversation and advertised her bakery. Of course, Kale bought all her bread. Sticking to his old habit, he tossed her a gold coin. Immediately, a smile appeared on the middle-aged woman's lips. She quickly went inside her shop and brought out a huge bag of bread already packaged and handed it to him. She was truly a savvy businesswoman. Before he could leave, she didn't forget to promote her shop for next time. Seeing a big profit right before his eyes, another bakery owner also started to eagerly solicit him. For someone like Kale, who needed bread more than gold, he naturally didn't refuse. So tomorrow he could visit 3 shops to get bread. Kale felt satisfied as his work became smoother. However, Kale didn't notice that in a nearby alley, Beecrox was watching his every move. He truly didn't understand what Kale was doing here. Ron Beecrox's father had told him that Kale was an interesting person. He hadn't paid much attention, but now the more he observed Kale, the more he felt his father was right. Watching him felt as interesting as watching that black-haired kid Choi Han. This isn't bread, is it? Kale Kim Ruk-soo internally snorted at the little girl, On, who was stammering while holding medicinal herbs in her hand. Isn't it? And then turned towards the man-eating tree. But the little boy Hong blocked his path. You can't die. Kale just walked past the boy. Kale, or rather Kim Ruk-soo the orphan, with nothing outstanding because of that many people sympathized with his pitiable state. Did one need a reason to sympathize with pitiful people? There was no need for a reason for sympathy. He too had once misunderstood that saying, but as he grew older, he understood clearly that actions stemming from the heart didn't need the intervention of reason. Kale hated seeing children suffer, but even so, he had no intention of comforting or protecting the girl. He frowned and said to the girl, On, who was hesitantly approaching, and to the boy, Hong with her, I won't die. At his words, the sibling pair no longer followed. The tree must have gotten too used to being cared for by him, so as soon as it saw him, it started demanding food. All right, eat. Kale again poured bread into this bottomless mouth. He could almost feel the darkness gradually fading. The money he spent was not in vain. After finishing his work, Kale turned around and saw that the annoying duo from before had disappeared. He couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. It was so pleasant not to see their injured faces. But this time, instead of seeing the 2 kids, he saw 2 cats, one silver-furred with golden eyes, On, and one red-furred with golden eyes, Hong, the ones he had fed chicken breast to last night. The 2 cats didn't meow but stared intently at Kale. He didn't want to get further involved, pretended not to know them, and quickly headed towards the Count's estate. And then he heard shocking news. Count Daruth had decided to let him represent the family in the capital. Usually Basin would be the one to go. However, this time the Count decided to let his eldest son Kale go instead. The royal family was organizing a major event, and the sons of noble families were all invited. Although Basin had attended such events for the past 2 years, he had never attended a royal event like this. Moreover, this time the Count also wanted Kale to go. Speaking of an event organized by the royal family, Kale immediately thought of the Plaza Terror incident mentioned in the novel. A mysterious organization would terrorize the plaza where many people gathered in the capital. The only person who could stop their plot was Choi Han. He had saved many people present there and became close to the royal family like friends. Kale started to feel a chill as he would have to be one of the people involved in that incident. Earlier, his father had mentioned that Basin was the one who usually went to events like this. Kale intended to ask his younger brother to go in his stead this time, as he didn't want to go to dangerous places anyway. The difficult part was that he couldn't bring himself to ask Basin. Besides, what reason was there for someone like him not to go to the capital? Also, he still didn't understand why Daruth was doing this. In 5 days, he would have to depart for the capital. According to the novel, during that time, the original Kale would be beaten to a pulp by Choi Han, so he couldn't go to the capital. Kale said he needed more time to think. Count Daruth agreed. The unusual meeting ended. He and Basin left the study. On the way, Basin said to him, "There's no reason for you not to go." Hearing this, Kale felt even more confused. He had been kicked out of the position of heir. His younger brother Basin had been acting as the heir for 2 years already. But now he suddenly said that Kale had a reason to represent the family this time. Things were starting to get more complicated than he thought. After all, the possibility of Kale returning safely was quite high. On the other hand, if Basin died and didn't become the Lord, it meant Kale would have to take over. Then he would be in big trouble. Basin needed to live for Kale to have a peaceful life. Right at this moment, Hans came to inform him about Choi Han's situation. Kale immediately told Hans to call Choi Han over, and if he didn't want to come, just tell him to come pay for his meal. Judging by Hans's expression, the main character's problem had probably been resolved. But now, Kale had to make an unexpected trip to the capital. Therefore, he would do everything to make this trip more comfortable. It was time for Choi Han to repay his debt of gratitude. Hans went to call Choi Han, and now he was sitting in Kale's room looking around. Kale looked at Choi Han, silently assessing him. Since Ron had taken care of his food and drink, Choi Han looked much better. Ron Beecrox and Choi Han, a promising trio just as Kale had predicted. Without beating around the bush, Choi Han directly asked what Kale needed him to do. Kale thought about the events in the novel. He realized he had changed the beginning of the plot of The Birth of a Hero. Because of that, many changes had occurred. Therefore, he tried his best not to let things go too far off track and to bring the storyline back to its original course. But he had to go to the capital. This would change the storyline even more. Kale placed a piece of paper on the table and said, "First, I need to know what you can do. Simply put, this is an interview. Continue." To those words testing his abilities, Choi Han answered with great interest. Because of that, Kale asked if he knew how to protect others. "What do you mean?" Choi Han was taken aback and immediately refuted Kale. Kale said nothing. The plan had just changed abruptly, but for some reason it seemed it would yield more benefits for him, preventing Choi Han's comrades from obtaining ancient powers, and what could be better than him seizing those useful powers for himself? Anyway, for them, it didn't matter whether they had that borrowed power or not. It's quite simple. Can you protect others instead of killing them? The room suddenly fell silent. Cal didn't hear Choi Han's answer. After a while, Choi Han bowed his head deeply. Only then did he reply, I don't know. It would be very dangerous if Kale provoked him right now. So he chose to put it another way, asking if he could kill people. This time he easily replied, yes. Then you can also protect others, Kale continued. It will be quite difficult, but difficult doesn't mean impossible. So, in the life that Kim Rock-soo had lived, there weren't many situations he could avoid just because they were difficult. That was why he was always generous with his new life in the body of this trash Kale. But now there was a mountain he needed to overcome if he wanted to have a peaceful life later. According to the original story, it rained yesterday, and that was also the day Kale was supposed to be beaten to a pulp. But now things were different. Not only was he not beaten up, but he had also obtained the ancient power of the indestructible shield. He could feel its existence within his body. Now, even if he acted provocatively and picked a fight with Ron and Beecrox, he was confident he would survive and return. Returning to the main issue, Kale astutely noticed that the number of attendants following him, instead of decreasing as he had requested, tended to increase. So he mentioned this matter to his beloved old father. It turned out this was due to the arrangement of his stepmother, Countess Violin. It was all because she was thinking about the family's face, so she did it. She couldn't let outsiders think the Count's family was poor and needy. Kale thought about her family background. According to the original story, Violin was described as the eldest daughter of a poor baron, and it was said she dreamed of becoming famous. She gained influence by selling luxury goods to the nobility. Then she moved to this territory and became fascinated with the art of sculpture. Then she met Count de Ruth, and they fell in love. Currently, she had become a pillar of the cultural center in the territory. She was very proud of her life and satisfied with the family she was living in. It was true that bringing many servants was good. Anyway, without them even changing clothes would be inconvenient for Kale, who had now become a lazy system player. But the issue he was concerned about was that in the future the crazed black dragon would appear, and he didn't know how many people would die if this dragon wasn't dealt with. It didn't matter what others did, but he didn't want to see anyone die right in front of him, and he also didn't want to be responsible for those who got injured because of it. That was why he didn't want to bring many people. Kale began to chat with his stepmother Violin about art. Although not an expert, his comments on it were not hollow. This made Violin start to have a better impression of him. Finally, the preparations for red-haired Kale's trip to the capital were decided. Violin prepared the best and most expensive things for him. The Count, seeing the two of them talking harmoniously, couldn't help but be overjoyed. Then, regaining his position as host, he asked Kale if he had read the documents about the noble families he had given him. Of course, Kale had read them. Moreover, he found them quite interesting. The Count was satisfied with his son's demeanor. Finally, he began to hint about the man-eating tree, which was once withered but now had become lush and green. Kale knew he knew about his frequent visits to the slums, but he certainly couldn't know about the story of the ancient power. Perhaps he only knew that Kale had some impact on the tree. He subtly reminded Kale to pay attention to rumors because there was nothing more frightening than people's mouths and eyes. But if it was within the territory, he managed, there would be no problem. Kale thought it was true that only living in this territory could bring him a comfortable, carefree life. He hoped to quickly reach the capital, complete his mission, and then return to enjoy the rest of his life here. After eating, Kale said goodbye to everyone before setting off. The Count was busy with work, so he couldn't see him off and could only say goodbye here. His two half-siblings also seemed to want to say something but hesitated. Only when Kale spoke first did his usually taciturn younger sister Lily begin to wish him a safe journey. Kale also wished her to stay happy and healthy. Lily, surprised and embarrassed, replied to him. Kale approached the prepared carriage. As soon as he opened the door, he couldn't help but be surprised by what he saw before him. The sleeping spot for the cats was even better than his. And of course, the creator of this masterpiece was none other than Vice Butler Hans, this genuine cat servant. Fearing that the long journey would give the cats backaches, tired knees, and numb hands, Hans had prepared it to help them feel more comfortable throughout the journey. Because young master is fleeting, kitty is everything, the head butler Kale thought. He just didn't know that they could create fog and spit poison. Ron decided to sit next to the coachman, while Choi Han thought he should sit in another carriage to better protect Kale. Kale found this a bit odd, but didn't care. Choi Han could sit wherever he wanted. Even now, Choi Han's eyes were still full of hatred. It seemed he still couldn't let go and was very confused. According to the original story, after traveling with Beecrox Rosalind and Lok Choi Han had become quieter, but still had a knife in his heart. It seemed that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. No longer caring about the main character, Kale climbed into the carriage and ordered the coachman to set off, beginning the journey to the capital. Inside the carriage, Kale thought about letting Hans take care of the gifts for his two younger siblings. Before leaving, he had asked them if they wanted him to bring back any gifts. Unsurprisingly, they did want something. Lily wanted a sword. Kale was quite surprised that a 7-year-old girl wanted such a heavy gift. At this point, Basson explained that she dreamed of becoming a swordsman. After all, this was feasible as the Hennetus family had good genes, standard body proportions, and long limbs, making learning swordsmanship like a fish in water. Moreover, compared to her age, Lily was somewhat taller. With a little effort, she could become a swordsman. So red-haired Kale immediately agreed to the gift she wanted, promising to buy the most expensive one. Lily, being just a child, was overjoyed upon hearing this, thanked him, and then giggled. In contrast to his sister's somewhat violent gift, the gift Basson wanted was quite literary, a fountain pen. It wasn't difficult at all. Kale agreed to buy it for him. Suddenly, the carriage stopped, cutting off Kale's thoughts. He looked outside. How wonderful bandits! Didn't they see the family crest on the carriage? Not to mention his entourage was full of hidden experts with boundless schemes like this. Ron. Finally, his rabbit-hunting talent had a place to shine. Ron calmly told Kale to stay in the carriage while he and the others dealt with those riffraff. These bandits, this time, even their ancestors would be helpless. Even carrying them on their backs wouldn't save them. Kale leisurely sat in the carriage, calculating the time to reach the village that would be destroyed by the Black Dragon. About one more day. After dealing with the bandits, it was getting dark, so Kale's group decided to stop and rest. The main course for dinner was rabbit meat soup. It seemed the main ingredient was hunted by Choi Han. So besides hunting people, he also knew how to hunt animals. The two cats, seeing Kale, didn't seem to like it, meowed, demanding to eat. But why should they eat his leftovers when they had the servant Hans by their side? Hans had prepared a separate meal for them, ensuring it was healthy with no salt and no preservatives. This time, Kale's carriage encountered bandits. Among them, the strongest was undoubtedly Choi Han. This battle was as easy as turning over his hand for him without a single scratch on his body. Truly, the one who beat the Count's son was no ordinary person. Ron, seeing Kale eating little, feigned concern and asked. Kale knew the old man was just teasing him, so he spoke vaguely to get rid of him. Only Choi Han was genuinely concerned, thinking he wasn't feeling well and didn't want to eat. Suddenly, Choi Han called out to him. He stared intently at Kale, making him feel uncomfortable. It turned out he was curious if this was the first time Kale had witnessed a battle. Kale honestly replied, "Yes, this encounter with the bandits is the first time I've experienced a battle. For someone born with a silver spoon and sheltered within the Count's territory, how could I encounter such a situation?" But Choi Han thought this was also the first time Kale had faced danger. Big mistake. It was Choi Han himself who had made Kale feel scared and insecure these past few days. But not just Choi Han. The father-son duo of Ron also contributed no less to his depression. Unconsciously, Kale glanced towards them. Old Ron was looking at the rabbits he had caught and smiling while his son stood beside him sharpening a knife. Everywhere there were such abnormal people. No wonder every moment felt like he was walking on thin ice. His appetite had also decreased significantly. Choi Han offered a few words of reassurance and then seriously advised Kale to learn some martial arts for self-defense. Kale chuckled and pointed towards the escort. "Don't I have a lot of them already? Not to mention I also have the power of the indestructible shield." That's true. So Choi Han shifted his gaze to the leftover food on the table, then looked at Kale's weak and skinny body, silently resolving to protect him. So regardless of just having eaten, he threw himself into sword practice, hoping to become stronger. This couldn't help but make Kale even more uneasy. Was he planning to become strong enough to blow away the entire continent? Too scary. At this moment, Beecroc specially brought another dish to help whet his appetite. At the same time, the vice captain ordered everyone to gather behind for training. The carriage continued its journey. If it followed the original story in 3 days, the incident of the dragon going berserk would occur. Kale's carriage was currently in a territory owned by a viscount. This place bordered the Hennetus family's territory. Below the mountain to the right of the village was the villa of that viscount, and behind the mountain was where the Black Dragon was imprisoned. It was known that this Viscount was a dog under Marquis Stan Venianstan's second son, who had harmed his older brother to the point of disability to seize the position of heir. He was the one who frequently visited the villa to torture the poor dragon, eventually driving it mad and causing it to destroy the village. Just thinking about it made Kale's blood boil. The vice butler saw him huffing angrily and thought he was losing his temper due to fatigue. He quickly went to inform Choi Han so he could find an inn. Before Choi Han left, Kale kindly advised him to return soon. After all, he was just a teenager being cared for by others. Choi Han smiled and nodded. "Yes, I will return right away." Kale suddenly felt uneasy. He had a feeling like someone was handing him a poisoned apple with sweaty, clammy hands. A very uncomfortable, stifling feeling. And soon the cause of that feeling would be revealed. Before Choi Han could leave, an unexpected incident occurred. A carriage came speeding down the road regardless of an old man crossing in front of it. In a hair's breadth situation, Choi Han rushed forward like a god, pushing the old man aside, helping him escape being crushed under the carriage wheels. On the front of that carriage, a flag was flying, a red snake, the symbol of Marquis Stan's household. Kale sighed and opened the carriage door. Anyway, it seemed he had to go to where that old cliched script was playing out. Venian, a typical powerful noble, and also a typical villain in the novel The Birth of a Hero. His close servant got out of the carriage, his rotten personality no different from his master's. Instead of apologizing for almost hitting someone, he blamed the poor old man, saying he had intentionally tried to obstruct the noble's carriage. Not only that, but he also didn't know to make way for the carriage and called him a stupid commoner. Needless to say, this made Choi Han furious. His eyes began to fill with killing intent, as if the servant just needed to say one more word, and Choi Han would send him straight to hell to play a duet with King Yama. At this moment, Venian got out of the carriage, stopping his servant from continuing to argue with Choi Han. His dangerous gaze turned towards Choi Han. Knowing Venian's identity, Hans appeared quite cautious and approached, whispering into Kale's ear. "It seems Choi Han is very agitated." As the owner, Kale stepped forward to calm Choi Han. At this moment, Choi Han was still indignant. Why did he have to stop when they were the ones in the wrong? They could have changed direction to avoid them, but instead drove straight towards people. Kale knew that, but Venian wasn't an ordinary madman. It was best to remain inactive to avoid future consequences. Kale silently assessed Venian's dazzling golden hair and a gently smiling mouth, a neat suit without a single wrinkle, shoes without a speck of dirt. But what caught Kale's eye was a red stain on the sleeve of his white shirt. It seemed that bloodstain appeared when he visited the dragon. Venian approached and exchanged a few social pleasantries with Kale. He knew all about the Henatus family's situation as well as Kale's reputation. Kale admitted he was indeed the scoundrel Venian mentioned. Like his servant, Venian considered everything that happened to be the fault of that trash, the old man from earlier. He also didn't forget to subtly hint at Choi Han's improper behavior and that such an attitude needed to be re-educated. Hearing Venian's words, the old man from earlier couldn't help but be terrified. Knowing he had displeased Venian, he took all the blame upon himself, bowing and begging to be let go. The state of the people in each territory would be influenced by the personality of its ruler. So, from this it could be seen that the Viscount of this region was just like his master. Nobles who always considered themselves superior and abused their power. Kale also found Venian's behavior an eyesore deserving to be beaten up by Choi Han. However, Choi Han was under his command, and moreover Kale represented the entire Henatus family. Causing trouble with another noble was not good, especially since this noble was not mentally stable. The best way was to speak perfunctorily to end the matter and then slip away quickly. Looking at the old man kneeling in front, Kale couldn't bear it. He patted his shoulder, pretending to ask for a tavern to distract him, then extended his hand, intending to shake hands with Venian. Venian stared at that hand. The hand that had just touched that filthy commoner old man now wanted to shake his. No way. Right at this moment, the servant, astutely noticing, urged him to hurry on his way. Venian, on the surface, pretended to scold the servant for interrupting the conversation between two nobles, but inwardly he couldn't help but praise him. So he formally shook Kale's hand, then withdrew his hand at the speed of light, turned around, and got into the carriage. Kale played the role of a drunken noble, inviting him for a drink if they met in the capital, not forgetting to mock his position as heir. Vanyan disdainfully turned back, put on a gentle, smiling face at Kale, said a few words, and then left. Kale watched his carriage disappear inwardly, praying not to meet this troublesome fellow ever again. Then he reminded Choi Han that half the nobles would be like that, implicitly telling him to get used to it. Turning around, he saw the old man from earlier still kneeling on the ground. He approached, asked Hans, and then ordered Choi Han to escort him home. Coincidentally, the old man was the owner of the only inn in the village, so Kale's group didn't need to look for a place to rest anymore. Following the old man home, Choi Han suddenly called Kale back, questioning why he hadn't gotten angry earlier about Marquis Venyan's arrogant attitude. Kale asked him back why he should be angry. About Venyan looking down on him, about Venyan telling him to re-educate Choi Han, or about Venyan calling the old man who almost died trash. He wasn't someone who could say those words, nor did he want to say them, nor was he angry. He knew saying such things would be cool because that's what Choi Han would do. However, in his current position now was not the time. This was what he had learned from life: compromising with power. Accepting a certain degree of irrationality could help him live according to his own preferences. And one important thing was that he held grudges. Sooner or later, he would make that Venyan get kicked out of his house because he would steal the dragon from his hands. The old man guided Kale's entourage to the inn. Like this village, the inn had a simple exterior, but because it was a place where merchant caravans frequently visiting the Hennetu's territory stayed, it had everything. Kale was given the best room. Although he seemed more comfortable than when facing Venyanstan, the fact that a noble was staying at the inn still made the old man fearful. As a noble, Kale quite liked it when others were wary of him, but being treated excessively also made him feel uncomfortable. He advised the old man to relax. Besides, he didn't like self-deprecating words. This was a place where those who frequently passed through his territory rested. How could such a place be lacking? So he didn't need to worry. The old man, after listening, fell into thought. Perhaps this was the first time he had met such a kind noble. He couldn't help but wonder if there were many people in the Hennetu's family's territory who were as kind as Kale. Kale chuckled and replied, "I am the biggest scoundrel in that territory. Everyone else is better than me." After settling things, the old man bowed at a 90-degree angle and asked for permission to leave so Kale could rest. Kale thought he probably needed more time to absorb his suggestions. A little later, Hans came to the room and gave Kale the box he had prepared earlier. The two words, curiosity, were clearly visible on his face, which surprised Kale. Wasn't a butler someone who shouldn't reveal their emotions? Hans didn't think so. Showing everything to his master was one of the things a butler should do. He even considered himself an interesting person. After rambling, Hans reconfirmed the duration of their stay in the village with Kale, and then left the room. Besides Hans was also someone who didn't tremble before Kale. Although he was a bit wary, he didn't tremble at all. This proved his courage was not small. Placing the box on the bed, Kale slowly opened it. Inside was the thing that would help save a pitiful creature, trick a madman, and help him avoid injury. This was the result of a transaction with that Bilos. Owning it was not an easy matter. Ordinary people couldn't get it. Moreover, it required a huge sum of money, several 100 million gallons. So to save costs, he could only rent it for 20 million gallons under Bilos's name. That was why he had to meet him in the capital to return it. Kale admired the object in his hand. It was a black jewel used to disrupt mana trajectories. This jewel would cause chaos in mana trajectories within a certain range, and magical devices would not be able to operate. However, the drawback was that to use it, it needed to be installed a day in advance, and its usage time only lasted for about 40 minutes. The price of the jewel was indeed steep, but its internal components were sturdy and not easily destroyed. This satisfied Kale. With the tools in hand, it was now time for the two cat tribe siblings to shine. Kale took out the map and began to guide them. They were in the village. From here, going east of the mountain, they would see a villa. To avoid being detected, they should not go too close to that area. Behind the villa, there was a cave, which was where the 4-year-old black dragon was imprisoned, and he planned to bury it there because the Viscount guarded it, strictly making it difficult for ordinary people to enter. But for the cats, it was different. Their mission this time was to bury this sphere on the mountain. The cat siblings were very confident about this because they could even escape from the adults in the cat tribe, let alone mere humans. Upon completing the mission, Kale promised to reward them with a full meal of beef. Speaking of food, the two cats couldn't contain their joy and immediately set off on their mission. For the rescue to succeed, he alone was not enough. He had to find more allies, and the most promising candidate was Choi Han. So that's why there was a scene of Choi Han sitting in the room with him having snacks and tea. First, he had to probe him. Kale drank the familiar lemon water and asked Choi Han, "Have you ever seen a dragon?" He honestly replied that he had only seen dragon-like species. Kale knew what Choi Han was referring to. It must be the monsters living in the deep forest where he used to live. Monsters species with bizarre and ferocious appearances. Kyle began to educate Choi Han about dragons, casually mentioning the pitiful situation of that unfortunate dragon. Dragons were like humans. Dragons, beastmen, elves. All those types were similar to humans because they all had emotions and souls. However, if from birth they didn't know who they were but were imprisoned in darkness and lived in it without knowing the existence of sunlight, they would lose their rationality. No family, no desires, only loneliness. A tragic life, revolving around being tortured and abused until they were on their last breath. Hearing this, Choi Han's face filled with killing intent. That reaction was not outside Kale's expectations. For a good-natured person like him, how could he not fly into a rage upon hearing such a story? Kale began to get to the main point that there was such an entity nearby. He wanted to rescue it with Choi Han. Choi Han agreed immediately without thinking. But Kale's purpose was simply to rescue and release the dragon into the wild, not to keep it for himself. Simply because that dragon grew up under human torture, so it no longer trusted humans. Besides, humans and dragons were both species that liked to stand above other species, and dragons were also very arrogant, so taming and keeping one by his side was not a simple matter. Most importantly, raising a dragon felt too powerful. There would inevitably be a time when it brought disaster. There were a total of 20 dragons across all continents from east to west. Owning one of them would make oneself the center of the entire continent. For someone like Kale who wanted a leisurely life, this was naturally unacceptable. To conclude the matter, Kale would rescue the dragon with Choi Han in secret, but here Choi Han didn't need to kill anyone. They would secretly resolve everything. Kale told Choi Han to go down to the first floor and tell Hans to bring a table for him. The main purpose was to create a fake scene to facilitate their activities. Hans prepared everything as Kale requested, then sat next to Choi Han looking after the cats, while Kale drank one bottle after another. The owner said this was a special wine made from fruits and herbs growing around the mountain, so they were also quite expensive. So Kale conveniently bought all that wine and treated the entire escort. It was best to get them dead drunk. Then he pretended to be drunk and had Choi Han help him up to his room to rest. When going up the stairs, Kale caught Ron looking at him assessingly. Although this old man didn't care what he did to avoid trouble, it was best to inform him beforehand. So as he passed by, he honestly confessed that he was going out and asked him to keep it a secret. Ron understood and didn't ask any further questions. Up in the room, he specially instructed the servants not to disturb his rest unless it was an emergency. Then, when no one was looking, he whispered to Choi Han to climb into his room through the window when the sun set to begin their operation. At the appointed time, Choi Han did as Kale said, ready for the dragon rescue. Choi Han was surprised by the strange thing. Kale was wearing a black outfit. On the upper part near the chest, there was a symbol with a white star in the center and 5 red stars around it. There was no time to explain. Kale put on a mask and threw a similar outfit to Choi Han. Thanks to the magic device the cat siblings had buried on the mountain yesterday, the magic recording devices would be deactivated. But that still wasn't enough. Kale didn't want to be exposed. That's why he had been drinking since morning and had prepared these outfits. This was the uniform of the secret organization in The Birth of a Hero. In the novel, the secret organization clashed with Choi Han in one event after another, so their attire was also described in great detail. Using that as a model, Kale had specially designed this outfit. As a precaution, the outfit was custom-made, and the symbol was made by Kale himself. If you looked closely, you would notice the shoddy stitching, but from a distance, it looked exactly like the real thing. Those who saw this outfit wouldn't notice the shoddiness, but would only remember the black outfit with 5 red stars and 1 white star.